The Hollow Beneath. In the year 2030, beneath the crust of a world that hummed with restless ambition, there was a place carved from stone and steel, an underground labyrinth of a laboratory where the air hung heavy with purpose and the faint tang of something humid and metallic. Dr. Amon stood at the heart of it, his gloved hand steady as he adjusted the dials of a machine that whirled with a low, persistent murmur. Around him, the team moved like shadows. Dr. Lester, wiry and sharp-eyed, scribbling notes. Dr. Oligard, broad-shouldered and deliberate, peering into a microscope. And Dr. Mileside, her fingers trembling slightly as she labeled vials of amber liquid. They were chasing a dream, a universal painkiller, an elixir to silence the body's cries, to smooth the jagged edges of human suffering. It was noble, wasn't it? That's what Eamon told himself as he inhaled the strange bouquet of the lab, maple and oak, fern and yew, a forest wrapped in sterile walls, mingling with the fresh sting of corn, pollen, and the burnt edge of something unnameable. The lab was cold, its surfaces sturdy and unyielding under their touch, though here and there a cracked panel or a split seam hinted at the strain of their work. They were in the first steps, the tender infancy of discovery, dissecting specimens, roots and trunks, branches and limbs, testing how they twisted and bent under pressure, how they reacted to the scalpel's kiss. Eamon's goal was clear, to map the pathways of pain, to sever them at their source. But as the days bled into weeks, something shifted. The silence of the lab, once a comfort, began to fracture. A murmur arose from the specimens, faint at first, like wind rustling through a canopy. Then it grew, a scream, raw and piercing, echoing off the concrete walls until it lodged into their skulls. Eamon froze, his hand hovering over a tray of dissected parts, feet splayed like roots, a head split open like a fallen log. The sound wasn't mechanical, wasn't a glitch in their equipment. It came from them, the specimens, and it carried a weight that made his stomach twist. He glanced at Lester, who had dropped his pen, his face pale. Oligard straightened, his jaw tight, while Mileside pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with something like fear. Or was it guilt? The air thickened with scents now, willow and lettuce, peas and potatoes, a garden of allergy and ash that clawed at their throats. What was that? Mileside whispered, her voice barely audible over the fading echo. Eamon didn't answer. He couldn't. The scream had peeled back a layer of their work, exposing something raw and broken beneath the cold logic of science. They'd been so focused on the goal, on the greater good, that they hadn't stopped to ask, "What are we doing?" The question hung there, unspoken but heavy, as they stared at the limbs and bodies strewn across the table. Were these just trunks and branches or something more? The ethical debate crept in like a splinter, sharp and insistent. "We're saving lives," Lester said, his tone defensive, as if he'd heard Eamon's thoughts. "This is the cost. You don't get progress without this." "But what if they feel it?" Mileside countered, her voice trembling. "What if they're screaming because they know?" Oligard snorted, folding his arms. "They're specimens. They don't know anything. We're projecting." Eamon wanted to agree, to cling to the sturdy framework of their mission, but the scream lingered in his ears, a sound that split his certainty in two. He pressed the others, his voice low but firm. "We need to consider this. If there's even a chance they're sentient, if they're suffering, can we justify it?" Lester's eyes narrowed. "Can it, Eamon? We're too deep to back out now. You want to throw away months of work over a noise?" The words stung, a disaster of dismal that left Eamon reeling. He retreated to his station, the cold metal of the table grounding him as he stared at the broken forms before him. The smell of burnt tomatoes and fresh corn swirled around him, a mockery of life in this sterile tomb. He pushed them, and they'd pushed back. Now what? In the days that followed, Eamon tried to rally his fellows. He cornered Milestone by the centrifuge, her hand still shaking as she pipetted samples. "You heard it too," he said. "You felt it. We can't ignore this." She hesitated, her lips parting as if to speak, then closed again. "I don't know, Eamon. I don't know what I believe anymore." He turned to Olgard next, catching him during a rare break as he chewed on a ration bar that tasted faintly of pollen and metal. "You're not troubled by this? Not even a little?" Olgard shrugged, his massive shoulders rolling like a fallen tree. "Troubled, sure, but science isn't about feelings, it's about results." Lester was the hardest nut to crack, his wiry frame bristling with defiance when Eamon approached. "You're wasting time," he snapped. "We're close. Closer than we've ever been. Don't sabotage it with your bleeding heart." The reactions left Eamon adrift, his goal fractured under the weight of doubt. Was he even sure about the sounds? Had he imagined their depth, their despair? He replayed the scream in his mind, dissecting it as they dissected their specimens, searching for proof. The lab felt colder now, the sturdy walls closing in, the split seams whispering of collapse. The smells, maple and oak, fern and yew, turned cloying, a reminder of life snuffed out for their ambition. Taste of humid air coated his tongue, metallic and bitter, as if he'd swallowed the cost of their work. He faced a dilemma. Cling to this unease, or let it go. The suffering of others, those silent trunks, those screaming branches, gnawed at him, but so did the promise of their discovery. A universal painkiller could save millions, could erase agony from the human experience. Wasn't that worth it? Didn't the ends justify the means? He paced the lab, his boots scuffing against the fallen debris, his hands brushing cold steel and broken edges. The murmur returned, softer now, a plea or a warning, he couldn't tell. In the end, he made his decision. Science was more important. Knowledge was the altar they served, and sacrifice was its price. The suffering of others, those roots and limbs, those feet and heads, was the cost of their comfort, their triumph. He straightened, his resolve hardening like sturdy walls around him, and returned to the team. Climax had come and gone, the scream a turning point that forced them to confront the hollow beneath their work. Now, in the falling action, they gathered around a table littered with notes and vials, the air thick with the scent of willow and burnt lettuce. Eamon spoke first, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. "We move forward. We refine the process, minimize the noise, if we can, but we don't stop." Mileside nodded slowly, her eyes downcast. "If we can make it quick, less like that, maybe it's bearable." Olgard grunted his approval, already sketching out adjustments for their protocol. Lester smirked, a glint of triumph in his sharp eyes. "I told you, we're too close to quit." They discussed logistics, how to dampen the sounds, how to streamline the dissections. The ethical question lingered, a shadow they couldn't quite banish, but they buried it beneath layers of rationale. The specimens weren't human, weren't sentient in any provable way. They were tools, means to an end. The murmur persisted, a faint undercurrent of their voices, but they tuned it out, focusing on the cold, sturdy path ahead. In the conclusion, the team stood united, their decision a pact sealed in the dim light of the underground lab. The research was more important than the specimen's well-being, more important than the screams, the smells of maple and fern, the taste of pollen and metal. They'd chosen knowledge over mercy, progress over pause. Eamon looked at the limbs and bodies, the roots and trunks, and felt a pang he couldn't name. Was it guilt, regret, or just the cost of being human, of reaching beyond what they were given? The lab hummed on, its silence broken only by the occasional murmur, a reminder of what they'd traded. Outside, the world waited for their miracle, oblivious to the hollow beneath. And in the depths, the scientists pressed forward, their hands cold, their resolve sturdy, their souls split by the things they'd done for knowledge.